I'm here because I lost my precious daughter almost 3 years ago due to fentanyl. Jayla was a 9-pound baby. She was my biggest child that I had to birth. She was always energetic, somewhat shy, but she always stood out. She was the baby of the house. She was the youngest of my 3 children. So we always pacified her because she was the youngest. My daughter loved boxing. She loved, as she got older, of course, she loved beauty. She loved to wear makeup. She loved to do her hair. She loved to put on clothes. Typical things teenage girls like to do. My children always went to my last 2 children have always went to an all-girls school. And then eventually I sent them into a co-ed school. From there, I believe the sudden change of environment in the school kind of like took my daughter on this roller coaster of change. I've noticed that Jayla took a liking to boxing. I guess she felt like she needed to be able to protect herself. Um, in my kids' upbringing, we've always lived in very challenging areas where protection is one of the main things that you have to kind of like take under your wing for safety. Kids could be pretty cruel sometimes. Jayla was kind of rather a thick girl in some times of her life. And I'm sure kids probably made some mean gestures of teasing. And so, of course, it took my daughter to being more physical with some of the children because of that. And I think that, the boxing came as a way of Jayla coping with some of the everyday pressures that she had to deal with where we were actually living. Even though she had a lot of bumps and bruises throughout her short time here, she always, made it her business to, absolutely determined to never stop and never quit. My daughter had a time period in her life where she actually ran away from home. My daughter still never missed school. She still was going to school. She still was making it through. A lot of people quit. So for a child to be determined, to continue going on and fighting for, the finish line to me was pretty impressive. She had her challenges in school. Jayla, pretty much towards the end of her life, she was determined to graduate. That was really important to her, no matter what. My daughter, during COVID, of course, the kids had to virtually, do school at home on a computer, which was very challenging because unfortunately, just like in class, some of these kids misbehave online as well. But, my daughter got up every day consistently. One time, I never really had to scold her about getting online or anything like that. And I'm only speaking this about the schooling towards the end because this is towards the end of her life. But she was definitely determined. She definitely wanted to have her bragging moment about, hey, I got my diploma. And that made me very proud of her. So she did very well in school. As my daughter got older, I changed my daughter from an all-girls school to a co-ed school. I began to see changes in my children. behavior wise. Number one, what I did notice is that it was a little bit more harder for them to focus on their studies in school. I started noticing things, of course, these kids in this time, a lot of these kids are introduced to marijuana. It's like the thing to do. I started noticing some things just with the patterning of, how they would come in the house, how they would look, may have even smelt, you know, some of the residue of marijuana. So, things just began to unravel for the worse when my children started getting up in age. Of course, at that time, me being a single parent, I took on a very huge role and responsibility of getting into politics. I was such a go-getter and fighter, not just for my home, but it began to surface on the outside of my home, whereas though I was being really responsible for a lot of my community. A lot of the members of my community outside of just my home. So, with that being said, I feel like with all that I had going on, it could have allowed my children a little bit more space, I'll say, to do a lot more things or get involved with a lot more things that I can say that was introduced or taught to them in the home. One thing about me, I always instill values within my children to try to keep them on a straight path and straight track of just being obedient to my rules and not to be, you know, out there like wild children, considering, the fact that we lived in a very challenging area with a combination of drugs, crime, gun violence. Try to keep your kids on a clear path. Unfortunately, I feel like the streets were able to swallow my children with influence, which greater, much, much greater than the influence in the house. I think sometimes people don't, or parents don't realize the influence can be anywhere. I don't care if you live in a White House to the poorhouse. Influence on the outside, social media, peers, peer pressure. It could be your neighbor who could be a bad influence for all we know. Influence come in so many different ways. And you cannot feel like you're above and beyond any of this, when it comes to the youth. Children, at a very young age, their minds are like sponges. They pretty much pick up everything. The school that my children went to up until maybe the 5th or 6th grade, they pretty much started out with those same children from kindergarten. So when they broke away from those children and went to a whole different school, you had a combination of children from all over the District of Columbia. Of course, they were not familiar with a lot of them. Maybe one or two probably, travel along with them to the school that they actually enter into. But I just think it just had a change of I guess the attitude just started changing and the behaviors. I just noticed as they were not only getting older, but just with the change of the location of they went to school. That was just when I could say I started seeing the changes. Children are basically, and this goes pretty much across the board, they are more so, hypnotized by influence. Like, it's all about being in. And when I say being in, like, what's cool, what's considered to be cool, what's considered as being accepted. And the problem that we have out here in this world is that this is not just for children, but a lot of adults deal with this too. People want to be accepted. A lot of times, people kind of sway into a direction of doing things that maybe they shouldn't, or, just out of curiosity, they get themselves involved with. I just feel like my daughter just was too trusting. You have to realize my daughter came up under my raising as a mom. And my daughter only sat back and watched a lot of how I cared and nurtured my community. A lot of what I didn't allow or didn't approve of, their friends' moms were allowing it. So I looked like the bad person. I looked like the mean mother, you know. But in all reality, it was just that me as a mom, I am making sure that I protect my children at all costs. And that is to make sure that they understood that all smiles that come before you are not your friend. It's really weird because before my daughter passed, at that particular time, I was a commissioner for the DC area. And of course, we're like most politicians in our area, we find out a lot of things much quicker than any other constituent in the city. There was information circulating about this fentanyl that possibly could have been floating around, and pretty much alerting us to tell our constituents to be a little bit more cautious and, let people know that there is this stuff floating around in our city. I didn't feel threatened by it when I heard about it because I didn't have any clue that my daughter was involved in anything like this. However, people that I was aware of that had children that were dipping and dabbing into alternative drugs to get high, I informed them to be more on the lookout or alert for this beast named fentanyl, only to find out later that this very beast that I was alerting other people about was going to hit my home. Excuse me, June the 22nd, 2021. It's at that moment when I felt in my heart that this animal had hit my home. I don't know, it's like I instantly felt something come over me that said, I believe your daughter got hold of some fentanyl. Something's terrible has happened. When I located my daughter that morning, she had foam coming out of her mouth. Her skin had begun to, she was a little warm, not exactly cold, so I'm not really clear on how long she was departed from me, but I knew something was wrong. As I go back into memory on that day, I probably had a scream the whole block probably heard. That's how that's how hard it hit me when I felt my daughter. So I'm not sure what happened to my daughter as far as her coming in contact with what has taken her life. But I will say that, out to my knowledge, I've never known my daughter to have been a drug user. I've never known her to come in contact ever with fentanyl before the time of her death. So it's still a mystery to me as to what has occurred up to the moment of my daughter's death. I'm not sure of who she came in contact with, who gave her this drug, how this drug ever came about to her. I don't have any answers. The police came into my home. They confiscated her phone. They took my daughter out the house. As far as I'm concerned, I don't feel like there was a thorough investigation. It was almost to me like they waited on the autopsy. The findings came forward as to how she, or what was found in her system. And that pretty much was like, oh, okay. And that was that. I just talked to the detective this year, maybe just over a month ago, and I said, well, is this it? He said, yes, it's pretty much it. I don't feel like people that was around my daughter the day before, the day of, I don't feel like they pulled no one down there to investigate or question them, which I thought was terrible. I'm really clueless as to what had occurred, particularly because, again, I don't even know who my daughter was around. I don't know if she could have just met someone that day. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really don't know. So I feel like if they would have put their best foot forward and did a thorough investigation and kind of hammered some of the people that were around her before she was deceased, I feel like something would have came out of it. But no one was called down. You know, at this point, everybody should have been an investigation. I would even been offended if they would have pulled me down. I mean, because I was around her, right? So if it even took them to call me, I wouldn't have even gotten offended. I'd have been like, oh, they're doing their job. But you didn't call no one down for an investigation? No one? Doesn't make sense to me. Neglecting anything is always going to cost you. And I feel like neglecting to do a thorough investigation could have costed someone else in my community their lives as well. I know not much later after my daughter passed, there was an area not far from me where I think 10 people were taken away for a bad dose of fentanyl being distributed throughout the area. These are victims that were buying drugs off the street, and some bad fentanyl hit the streets. And the only reason why I can remember that story so well, because one of the individuals that was a victim of that situation was a friend, one of our council members. So I felt like, because of who the person was connected to, it was a little bit more pressure. Yeah. But everyone should have equal opportunity, regardless of who you're affiliated with, who you're related to, or who you associate with. My daughter's just as important as anyone else out here. You know, whether or not she's affiliated, associated, or related to any of these people, I feel like her investigation should have been a top case. She was 17 years old. She was a child, an innocent child that was taken away from a horrible animal called fentanyl. That's ridiculous. Less than a mile from me, a 2-year-old was going to do the fentanyl. How do we know that this cannot or was not the same server that could have served my daughter a year before that and still out here doing the same dirty game? So we may could have saved other people's lives within a 1 mile radius of where I live at, if in fact we did a better investigation. So it's always possibilities. It's challenging for me. I still struggle with functioning regularly on a daily basis. I have trouble sleeping. I get into my moods. Sometimes I don't want to be bothered. Sometimes I'm cheerful and I want to be bothered. Sometimes I don't feel like doing anything. And there are times that I want to run the whole world. I know we're so busy, and I have a lot of women out here who are raising their children as single parents. But sometimes you just got to take the time out to really talk to your loved ones. Get more familiar with who's around your children. Continue to instill into your children the severity of coming in contact with this animal, this beast called fentanyl. What I've learned from this is that people are cold-hearted. We live in a world where, money is the root to all this evil that we are going through at this moment. But there's no value in the pain and suffering that we suffer as the families of these individuals. It's no amount of money that can take away this type of pain. For me, one thing we mentioned was about support. I feel like we need to continue supporting each other and families that are victims of loved ones who were lost to fentanyl. Because of what I know my daughter had experienced in her life, just dealing with the difficulties of, just trying to survive in our community. I would like to, extend a hand of, dealing with children one-on-one and educating these youth about, the importance of not coming in contact with this fentanyl. It's not fair, and it's not right that these people have to die because of someone else's greed. That's what I want to say.